Hey, good evening, everybody. How are you today? Glad you could join us. Tonight, I have the privilege of having two authors who have penned a beautiful book, which if you have not read The Long March Home, get your copy on order today and get it because it is fantastic. So Tosca Lee and Marcus Brotherton are going to be joining me shortly, and we are going to discuss the book. We're going to work very hard not to give spoilers away, but it is a World War II book, so we kind of know how it's going to end. Which does help, but it is a very different book. It is not your grandmother's World War II book. It is, as I have said to some people, a brutal read because it is stuff our boys went through in the Pacific Theater that is unbelievable. I know they did their research, and I'm sure they will be very glad to talk to us about that soon. And so they will be joining me shortly, I'm sure. And I know they had both needed to go get a couple things when they had turned their cameras off. So, oh, there's Marcus. Hi, Marcus.
Hi.
And there's Tosca Lee. Hi, Tosca.
Hi.
Thank you both for joining me tonight.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
You bet. Good. You know what? I was just telling everybody about your book. So why don't you guys tell us what is The Long March Home about?
Well, first of all, Chris, it's so great to see your face again. I haven't seen you since last summer. So, no, last October, I think we saw you very briefly. So good to see you again in person.
Thank you.
I'm so excited to tell you about The Long March Home, which you can see behind me on the shelf and behind Marcus on his shelf too. So, and right there. Oh, you have copies too. All right. This is the story of three best friends, the main character, Jimmy Propfield, and his two best friends, Billy and Hank. Billy is a little younger and Hank is about 1 year older. The three have been inseparable since Hank showed up in third grade. At the beginning of the book, they are stationed in the Philippines. It's 1941, and life seems pretty perfect, actually. This is a plum assignment. They are with the 31st Infantry. The weather's gorgeous. They get the afternoons off. There's beautiful, wonderful movie theaters, and the dollar goes a long ways. And their barracks hires locals to help out with the kitchen duty and taking care of their uniforms. And they're in Manila, which is the Pearl of the Orient in 1941. And so as members of the 31st Infantry, they're living a really good life until December 7th, 1941. And one thing I did not know when I entered into this story, into this situation, is that within hours of Pearl Harbor being bombed, the Philippines was also bombed and plunged into war. And so all of the Allied soldiers over there who were stationed there were immediately plunged into war as well. And so this is the story of the three best friends who are fighting in the Philippines. Within 4 months, the largest U.S. Allied surrender happens on April 9th, 1942. And they become POWs. And so we follow them through their journey through the war, through the harrowing chapter of history known as the Bataan Death March, and into POW life. And one unique thing about this book is that it has a dual timeline. And so we take a break and have a reprieve from the war every now and then to go back in time to a simpler time in the 30s. And we watch as these boys grow up together, form the bonds of brotherhood, even though they're not biological brothers. And we also get to see their fourth best friend, who is Billy's older sister, Claire, who is the love interest of Jimmy, the main character, and maybe of Hank also. So it's a coming of age story, and it is a story of friendship and a little bit of romance as well.
And that sums it up beautifully. I was saying before you guys popped on that, and I mean this in a very good way. You know, with fiction reading, you can use words like brutal for reading because it's so close to truth. So which I find interesting because you do mention that this is based on fact and then fictional telling of that. So how much is based on like actual people? I don't know if that's something you know for sure, or is it more loosely based?
Well, I'm going to let Marcus take that one.
Box, yeah. It's a gritty book. We like to say we like to use the word gritty. But one of the reasons for that dual timeline is if you're just sort of plunged into grit and there's never a chance to have anything other than that grit, it kind of actually loses its power over time. You're kind of like, oh, just one more thing after another. But that timeline allows you to lift and kind of catch your breath and go, okay, take a look around and then plunge back in. And the story is actually more powerful that way. So it is based on true stories. And I've interviewed veterans for years and have collected many of their stories. I did an oral history project with Adam Makos, who's a good historian in Central America there. And yeah, so we wedded those stories to stories we had read in books and cross-checked everything for accuracy. And yeah, it is what it is. So
Yeah,
There's a lot of events. So many of the events we have lifted from accounts of the survivors. So very much inspired by things that actually happened, all knitted together.
so you've done this research, and Tosca, you are known for fiction writing, and Marcus, you are known for doing biographies. How do you marry that and then write this? I mean, it's obviously a fiction book, so maybe, I mean, I don't want to take away from Marcus and I've read several of your biographies. They're very, very good. But we write a fiction story then. So how do you marry your two very different styles into this?
Well, I want to start the answer to that question with the fact that one thing that started this whole partnership off is that years ago, before Marcus even contacted me about writing this book, which is its own story, years before that, Marcus reached out to me, and he had written a novel called Feast for Thieves. And so he wanted to know if I would read it for endorsement, which I did. I really loved the book, and it went on to win a Christie Award. So Marcus is probably best known for his World War II biographies, but he does have fiction in his past. He has that checkered fiction past. So he has experience in that.
I've joined the tough gang of fiction every once in a while. Yeah, this book all started with. Actually, I've got to take you back to the very beginning, because I think it's fascinating how the story just generated from nothing. It all started with Lieutenant Buck Compton, a real man, who was one of the Band of Brothers, and he was featured in the HBO miniseries that had been produced by Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg. So in 06, 07, I think it was, I helped Lieutenant Compton write his memoirs, Call of Duty. Went on to be a national bestseller. He was 85 years old when it came out, had lived a very rewarding life, a very tough hulk of a man. He'd been a judge and prosecuted Sirhan for the murder of Bobby Kennedy. So after his book came out, he was speaking and all over the country. And his daughter phoned me up and said, hey, my dad is having just a little bit of problems navigating airports. He kind of needs a traveling companion. Would you like to travel with him? And I was like, absolutely. Sign me on the dotted line. So I went traveling with Lieutenant Compton, and he had just an amazing memory for what had happened during his war years. So we're sitting in an airport one day, and he begins to tell me about the Battle of the Bulge, which he was in. Cold winter fighting conditions, 30 degrees below zero. The men are huddled in foxholes in the woods, outgunned, outmanned, not enough food, not enough winter clothing. Some of the men have wrapped their feet in burlap bags to ward off the cold. And as Buck is telling me about this, I'm like, man, what a difficult experience for you. And he pauses at this point and he goes, yeah, it was hard. But at least I wasn't in the Pacific. Man, those guys had it really rough. So that line makes my mouth drop open and stays with me for years. I'm like, what does Buck mean by really rough? I began to read up on the era. Eventually did an oral history project of my own on veterans who'd fought in the Pacific. But I stumbled on this book called Death March by Donald Knox. And it was an oral history project done with veterans who'd fought and gone through the Death March experience. And it was written in the 80s when the men were about 65 years old. So it's still pretty fresh in their minds at that point. So I love oral history. I've done oral history. It has its place in the canon of anybody's library, right? The one thing oral history doesn't have is it's not an immersive experience. You know, people are kind of telling their stories, kind of like they're sitting on a porch, but it's not like a really good movie or a really good novel that really plunges you into that story world and just lets you see and smell and taste and experience everything that's there. So that's when I began to dream of this novel. How can we turn this experience into this, not so we fictionalize the events, but just so we give readers that amazing experience. And that's when I actually began Long March Home, back in probably 2010. And this is part of the interesting story too. It was a back burner project. It was unfunded at the start. I worked on it just kind of as a passion project in bits and starts. I worked on it for 7 years, finally got a good working manuscript, sent it out to early readers. And the response that I got back was, yeah, it's good. Yeah, it's very good. It's working. But what I didn't hear was, this is fantastic. And I wanted it to be that. I wanted to elevate it just to the absolute best it could be, because we were shining the spotlight on the veterans who had been there, and they deserved an A+ project. So I called up my agent, and he said, here's the deal. It's gritty, and you're probably a little bit too close to the canvas. Why don't you call up somebody, bring in a female collaborator, and she'll know how to reach that great swath of fiction readers out there, and then she'll help bring perspective. And that's when I called Tosca. Take it away, Tosca.
That was probably, I want to say 2017-ish, when Marcus called me and told me about this, told me what he had just told you, and gave me the premise of the book about the 3 best friends and the Bataan Death March. And I had no knowledge of the Pacific at all during World War II.
Oh.
I didn't know. I mean, yeah, I've seen some like movies like about Midway and stuff like that, but I didn't really have a good conceptual understanding. And I had no idea about the Philippines. I'd never heard of this death march before. And so as Marcus was telling me, I mean, I knew that this was a kind of a new thing for me. I mean, I do write historical fiction. For those of you who've read my books, my historical fiction is usually 2,000, 3,000 years ago, not 80. And it was actually a little intimidating. I mean, I love the research. That's something I've always been known for, but to research something where people are still alive that can say, it was this way or that way, it brings a whole new level of intimidation. But anyway, so we're talking, and this sounds like an important story and something that maybe other people like me who hadn't heard about it should also hear more about. And so I said, yeah, let's do it. And so that's what started it. Yeah, that's how it started. And I added 5 years to the process. So it's a 12-year novel. So,
we like to take our time. Ask us to write a book. We'll get back to you in a decade or longer.
Yeah, if it's going to be this good, we'll wait.
Our next event with Baker Bookhouse will be in 2033. So
right, yeah, join us.
I will be retired, so I'll let the next fiction buyer know. So we'll mark the calendars. Awesome, and I love that you did it so deliberately. I mean, you really did. You did each part very deliberately, which of course, then we get this. So you have your 2 very different writing styles. Marcus, I apologize. I did not know you had a fiction. I will go look that up.
Oh, order it in. Yeah, you'll want to get that one. Yeah.
I will.
It's a
get that in
delight.
and-
It really is. Yeah.
Good, good. So you have your two very different writing styles. How do you write together separately? Because you
Mhm.
don't live anywhere near each other, right?
And no, Marcus
Yeah.
is in Washington. I'm in Nebraska on the farm.
We write by arm wrestling.
No.
That's how we write. When Tosca came aboard, it was great because I had read a number of her books as well and really respected her writing, and so I knew that I kind of had a sense of what she would bring to the table. She writes very lyrically. She writes in layered styles, sort of saying one thing and inferring another, which is really great. And so the directive I gave her initially, or the request, I just said, just be as free as you can be. And then I got out of her way. And because I didn't want to micromanage this project. I knew if I was just sort of, hovering over her shoulder, that would not go well. So Tosca dismantled things and did her own research just to make sure I was telling the truth, and just dived in with everything she had. Turning everything over and worked to straighten things out. I was probably doing too many things at the start. And so she did a good working draft of it next, actually a couple of years later. And then,
a few years,
and then
it was a few years.
it was a few years. And there's reasons for that. COVID got in the way.
COVID,
other projects got in
books.
the way. And then once we had that manuscript that she had worked on, then we began to work on it together and sort of go over it, each taking draft. So it got blended into one voice over time.
Mhm. I think that this is a really unusual situation. I always say that every writing partnership is different. And, even one partnership doing multiple books would be different, but from book to book. But to have a situation where an author will just essentially turn over all his materials and say, here you go, have at it. I think that's really unusual because it takes an incredible amount of trust and very low ego to be able, honestly, to be able to say, I've been working on this for 7 years, but okay, here you go. And so I have a great appreciation for Marcus doing that. And I disappeared for months at a time working on that. And during COVID, I shut down creatively for a while. And he just was very patient. He was working on his stuff, and I had a couple other books, but he was very willing to let me go in and pull some wires out or add more stuff or add a new section and say, let's go over here. And I really, really appreciate that.
There was a ton of flexibility in the process, I think, from both of us. And then there was also a certain amount of backbone. Like we each got to the place where we had our like a few non-negotiables. And in communicating those non-negotiables, we would like cast a vision for the other person. Like, okay, here's why I really believe this has got to be in, whether it's a scene or a paragraph or even a line. And we would flex to each other pretty well, but every once in a while we'd say, okay, this one we've got to go arm wrestle on. I mean, come on, and here's the reason why.
Marcus was always the nice one. He'd be like, here's why I feel strongly. And I'd be the one who would say, like, I'm going to fight you on this. But, we never fought. There was never any fighting. It was always, okay, I see why that's important to you. And I honor that. And there was a lot of humor and a lot of prayer that went into this process as well. And there still is to this day.
Tosca works best at like 3 a.m. I've come to see. And so emails at 3 a.m. just get punchy and funny and silly. And, when you're working on such hard stuff, you kind of have to, raise the levity level a little bit. So, we started saying things like awesome possum to each other. I don't even know what that means, but it's stuck and it's in
I don't think we even spelled it right.
Probably not.
Spell check is just,
Right.
hard. You never know what it's going to tell you. So. Well, awesome. So one of the questions I am just really curious about now, Tosca, maybe this might be a little different for you, is that what is something in your research in this book that really surprised you? Like something like you had to double research it because it was so unbelievable.
That anybody survived. I mean,
Okay.
if you dig into the history of the Japanese occupation of the Philippines, and they'd never ratified the Geneva Convention, so there was no accountability to that. The fact that, let's just back up, you go to the war. When the war starts, it was a logistical nightmare. I mean, they didn't have enough food, they didn't have medicines. These guys had malaria and dysentery and all different kind of issues all the time. They're eating the Philippine scouts' horses. They're eating whatever animals they can come across. They're starving. And so to go from that to being taken as a POW and then marched, and so the Bataan Death March, let's just define that, is when they're marched from the Bataan Peninsula, which is where they were holding out in the Philippines, hoping reinforcements would come.
Yep.
And they're marched 60 miles north up to a POW camp. They're marched there with no food, no water. If you drop by the side of the road, you get bayoneted, or if you stop to help somebody, you get shot. If you try to stop and get water, there's artisan wells. Even if you try to drink out of a carabao, water buffalo, wallow, brackish water that's not even good to drink, you'll get shot. So the fact that anybody could survive the war and then survive this march and then survive, I think it was 41 months, if I remember now, almost 4 years as a POW with these conditions of just continual starvation, being worked to death, all of this. The fact that anyone survived is an absolute miracle and testament to the strength of luck and good fortune, but also faith and friendship, because those who had friends were the ones who often made it.
Oh, isn't that interesting? Huh. What about you, Marcus? What's something you found out that, and you probably, have a little background in it too, but what is something in the research of this one particular?
Yeah, it's a tough story. No question about it. And when as we study the enemy in our research, to develop that sense of empathy even for the enemy, and go, okay, they had reasons for what they did and how they went about things. And when you study a worldview that views surrender as an act of cowardice, tremendous warriors they were, and in their worldview, yeah, the American surrender was seen as just horrible, and so they didn't quite know what to do with the amount of prisoners they had, and then they had been indoctrinated not to respect that. Does it justify their actions? I'm going to say no, but it does explain the enemy. Clint Eastwood did those two movies a number of years ago, Flags of Our Fathers and Letters from Iwo Jima. Yeah. And so basically he took the same scenario and did two movies, one from the Allied perspective and one from the enemy perspective. And in the research process, yeah, I was asking myself what happened to our guys over there for sure. And I was trying to get in the mindset of the enemy as well.
Interesting. Wow. So then that it makes me also think of this question is, why do you think we know so little about this war? I can remember in school, we were, in the European theater, we followed the battles and did this. In the Pacific theater, it was like, well, they bombed Pearl Harbor, Midway happened, the war was over. Why do you think in the history do we skip that theater?
It's probably an easier narrative to explain away. We were attacked and then we responded. Whereas the Pacific theater is, we were attacked, we responded, we surrendered, and then the surrender bought time for America to catch up. And so really the surrender was strategic, but it's harder to explain. Like, those guys did us a huge service, but it's harder to tell. So that was our job, to go in and try and tell this harder narrative.
Okay, well, that makes sense, because I've been trying to figure that out, because I've had people ask me, because you had this one and then here in the store. They came out. I knew about this one longer ahead, but Susan and two other authors, Susan Messner and two other authors wrote
When we had
Wings.
wings. Yeah,
Yes.
Susan Meissner, Christina
Yeah,
McNorris,
and
Muriel
so-
Lawson. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
I could not think of their names, so thank you
Yeah.
for sharing those. We're suddenly opening this to, the fiction readers, which, your book drove me to research it, like, reading. I had never heard of the death ships before.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
We tried to find, at the time we were tidying this up and getting ready to, hopefully find a publisher for it. We tried to find other novels that dealt with this war, and it was very hard to find anything. When We Had Wings wasn't out yet. That's about the nurses on Corregidor Island, which is the island right off the Bataan Peninsula. There's a mention of a survivor of the Death March in one of John Grisham's books.
Okay.
There's not a lot for fiction. There's nonfiction, but not a lot for fiction that puts you in the middle of this whole situation.
Yeah, because it's hard to write something that's easy to read.
It's not
Yeah,
easy.
and we come back to the grit side of things. The Japanese goal, although this is debated today among historians, was really, you can picture Japan as up north. They want to sweep down south, take all of those Pacific Rim countries, blow past the Philippines, and then hit Australia. If they can get Australia, then it's domination. Then it's a pretty easy jump to the American Western Seaboard and all the cities there. I mean, Seattle, Los Angeles, you name it. That's the big goal in inland. So what stands in their way? The big hang up in the Philippines, 4.5 months of hard fighting on behalf of the Allied troops do slow that juggernaut down. But it's hard to see, it's harder to see, it's hard to explain, and it is a brutal campaign, a brutal war. And so it's hard to delve into that. I mean, certainly in the European theater, we have the Holocaust, and I mean, that's brutal, gritty stuff as well. So we're not trying to say the European theater is easier in that sense, but it's a different enemy, a different mindset, a different geography, different goal.
Yeah, and that all makes sense because, you have the women soldiers or the women nurses that were there that were, they had to sign things when they came home that they weren't even going to talk about it. And so it just, I don't know, it just fascinates me because, you watch like the bridge over the River Kwai and things like that, I mean, these are fascinating stories that I love that they're starting to come out.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see because it's harder to write that romance that a lot of the World War II stories have in there too. Because So
I think it was important to us to really be on the front line and to experience what the boys were experiencing. And I call them boys. The main character is 18 when this happened. I have twin 18-year-olds who I cannot imagine being in that situation at all.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. I have she'll be 21 in a couple months, but granddaughter, which that's the nurses that were there.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not a wonder they came back.
Yeah.
Too young. We send them too early. So let me talk about Claire a little bit. She was an interesting addition to this movie or this movie. Now I got that on my brain. That's next. We'll be talking Academy Awards next. So, but so whose idea was that? Was that part of the original book, Marcus?
Yeah, Claire was in from the start. She was in from the start, although she had a different name at the start.
Okay.
But yeah, we wanted that home front story, and we talked through the various ramifications of presenting the home front as a kind of a simultaneous through line in the book, and that discussion, it probably took a year just to straighten out. But Claire is important. I mean, Claire represents the good in us, the challenges of staying at home while your loved ones went to war, not knowing if they would return, sometimes fighting your own battles at home, although a different kind of battle. I really like the character Claire. I like where we got her to be. She's the girl that everybody likes, and
Yeah.
you as a reader, I think you can't help but just really be charmed by her in every good possible way.
Yeah, and I can't give it away, but I was mad at her for one thing she did, so but I won't give it away.
Yeah, she's not perfect. Yeah.
I think that is why I liked all the characters. I should ask, so for you guys, who is your favorite character?
You know, I love them all for different reasons,
Okay.
but I love Hank because Hank is the bad boy. He's the slightly older friend who shows up in 3rd grade. He's the cool guy. He's the bad boy. He's the one that you want to follow, if only out of curiosity, to see what he'll do. And I like Billy. Billy's the youngest of the 3. He's the one who has to lie about his age to enlist. And Billy's funny. You know, Billy is the comic relief, and I like him. And Billy represents innocence. Hank represents experience. And I like them for different reasons, but Billy cracked me up. So I'm going to go with Billy.
Yeah, Jimmy, the main protagonist, he's the everyman. He's the Tom Hanks. I mean, he walks on the stage, and we all see a little bit of ourselves in Jimmy. Although he's pushed, he's a push character for reasons. We wanted him. He's the son of a preacher. He is used to having his world ordered in black and white, in right and wrong, in good and bad. And then he's put in this position where the boundaries are blurred. And he walks in the door. Now, I'm going to say this, but and Tosca, stop me if I go off on a rabbit trail here. Well, we've received just great feedback on the book so far, and we could talk about that more a little bit later. But we've received a little bit of criticism that the book doesn't seem to have enough redemptive arc. Now, a redemptive arc is you bring characters on at the start, and then and you kind of show their foibles and their problems, and then they've got to change over the arc of the story. And at the end of the book, although you don't necessarily want to tie things up neatly in a bow, because real life isn't like that, you do want to resolve some of those issues by the end of the book. So Jimmy's big sort of fatal flaw at the start is and I say this carefully, but it's a theological issue, where he is a black and white thinker, believing that God is going to reward him only if he's good. I mean, it's really a works-based theology. And so we bring this character in, and slowly we begin to dismantle his worldview. And the redemptive arc is there, dear readers, but I want to say we trust you enough to know your intelligence. And the redemptive arc is shown symbolically. It's shown in imagery, and it's not all shown sequentially. Some of it's a little bit here, some of it's a little bit here. It's kind of like painting on a canvas. Definitely this worldview is dismantled and then replaced with a different worldview, and that's what you have to see.
I would say that I agree with all of that. Jimmy is someone who has never had to, he's the son of a pastor. He's the son of a quite legalistic pastor, actually, who's never had to own his own faith in a way. And he's never needed a lot of grace because he's always been a pretty good kid. But when you go off to war, where the black and white that you've been taught and your morality is based on rules, when he's surrounded by a lot of rules, but when you go off to war and the fog of war obscures that black and white and turns it all gray, then you're faced with situations where you no longer know, and you have no choice but to throw yourself at the feet of grace. And so that's what this story is ultimately about. It's about redemption, and it's about getting to that point where you reach the end of yourself. It's just not our style to put it out there, because we're doing this in fiction, and so it's happening in symbols.
Yeah, and I
we
think,
give a great sympathy to, I mean, today's readers, we're all sort of struggling because we read like blog posts that are very sort of on the nose and, 3 tips to a better life or a better marriage or a better, head of hair or whatever we're doing. And then it's Twitter, let's get across this point very overtly in 140 characters or less. So I think when we approach a novel, we're looking for that that Twitter soundbite, but the novel takes its time to go, okay, I'm going to take you different places and I'm going to show you different things and I'm going to make you feel different things. And at the end of that book, you're going to go, okay, all right, and now I see it.
Mhm. We're
yeah,
gonna
if
have
I
to
had
go
known Jimmy at the end of your book first, I don't think I would have liked him.
through.
I mean, I'm not giving anything away here, so those listening, don't panic. Because I didn't know his story. And so when you get to the end, and there's times I'm mad at Jimmy, sorry. But I think that
Jimmy makes some dumb choices, right? Yeah.
What are you thinking?
Well, I think they all make some dumb choices, but they are teenagers and they are they are in tough situations, but
Yeah, I know, and war is glamorous, so what was he, 16, 15 when Billy
He's-
enlisted?
when they enlist, he's 18, but
Yeah, and
Billy's
then
16.
16, that's who, yeah, Billy was the young one, and I'm like, oh, what are you doing? But war was glamorous at that time. I mean, and patriotic, and I'm going to save the world. And
Well, if nothing else, I mean, you're still coming out of this tough depression era, and those guys who enlisted, they ate well. They got fed. I mean, jobs were hard to find, so it was a good choice for many people.
3 hots and a cot, they called it. 3 hot meals and a place to sleep. And it was really, I mean, we can't quite even envision ourselves in Depression era America, where if you have a job shining shoes for 30 cents a day or whatever, great, you're eating. Plenty of the young men of that era were faced with that, and young women too. And so, the military was an opportunity. And these guys actually enlist before Pearl Harbor, which is key because they're not sort of dreaming of, let's go off and fight our duty yet. They're just going 3 hots and a cot, and we want to get out of our hometown because it's a little bit too small of a world. So, let's go enlist.
Yeah. Huh. Isn't that interesting? I'd never heard it called that before. So now I knew something else. See, this book is teaching me all kinds of things. So Marcus, you brought up something that I did want to talk about is all the different praise you're getting for this book. I swear every time I turn around, somebody else is saying something glowing about this book. So share with me some of the different ones you have gotten.
Yeah. So the reviews you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny. We wanted to elevate the book to a high level. We wanted to take it from that B+ to an A+. In the book world, the trade reviews come out early and first, and it's Booklist and Publishers Weekly and Library Journal and things like that. Now, these trade reviews, they are often known to ignore a book completely. I mean, they have no great compulsion to review your book just because you published it. If they like you a little bit more than that, they'll give you a bad review just to let you know that they're really on their toes. If they're feeling, if they've had a good breakfast and feeling good about the day, they'll give you a good review.
I'm getting twitchy just hearing about this. This is my 12th novel. I'm like,
yeah, because we've all been there, sort of on every shade of these. He said knowingly. And then at the very top of the game, if it's a truly above par book, they will give you a starred review. It's very rare. It's kind of like the Michelin star of the book world. And in my 23 years of writing, I've received just like 1 or 2 of these in many books. This particular book has received 3 separate starred reviews from Booklist, Publishers Weekly, and Library Journal. which is, I mean, we're humbled by this. We're blown away. We're
Unheard
going,
of.
okay, it's unheard of, and yet there's a tremendous satisfaction there going. We took our 12 years to write it, and we did it for a reason, because we wanted to honor the troops who are there. And at the end of the day, I believe we're doing that.
Have you heard back from any veterans at all?
Yeah.
We've heard back from veterans. I have not heard back from veterans who had been in the Philippines. We're losing them. I've heard back from other veterans, including veterans who have done the Memorial Death March, which is carried out every year in New Mexico.
Yeah.
I had a letter from a reader right after this came out where he said, "I'm reading this in honor of my father who served in the Philippines." And I said, "Well, thank you for pre-ordering the book and, you know, the nice things." And he wrote me back a couple of days later and he said, I feel like I have a better understanding now of what my father went through. And I see now that he had PTSD, but they of course, they didn't call it that. It was, they were shell shocked, or it was survivor's remorse. And so to have people, we've had a lot of comments from people who said, my grandpa, my great uncle, my neighbor, the guy that worked the sound system at church, you know, they were survivors of this. And nobody quite knew the things that they were living with afterwards. And many of them did not talk about their stories until later in life, if they spoke about it at all. So
I write for a national news site, and I've interviewed veterans for that. In the last 3 months, the last 2 World War II veterans that I've interviewed, they've been 101 years old and 103. So it goes to show you that whole generation is pretty quickly passing away. I think the statistic is there were 16 million Americans who fought in World War II or who served in World War II in one branch or another. These days, there's about 250,000 left. So if you've got a World War II veteran in your neighborhood, in your church, in a social circle, please go talk to him, take him out to lunch if he'll let you, and buy lunch for him and shake his hand and say thank you.
Definitely. I mean, I live in a very small town in rural Michigan here, and every Memorial Day has a parade and the veterans go first. And when my kids first started being in it, World War II was humongous. It's very few now, and most of them are riding in cars. I think last year there were 10. And this year I have to be out of town, so I don't get to go because I love that parade. It's one of my favorites. Yeah, I mean, and that's why I love that you do these things, because these are the stories we're losing without even knowing we're losing them.
Right.
So I gotta ask, are you guys gonna write another book together?
Don't know. We've been asked this question. I think part of the answer to that is, you know, we don't know how well this one did yet. So it's like, is this like a dun da da or a wah wah? You know, we don't know.
I think it's a dun da da.
It's hard to
From my
know.
point of view, it's doing all right. So
This is a standalone story, and so it wouldn't be, you know, another book in the series. But yeah, you know, would we do another World War II book together or another historical? Yeah, I mean, Tosca, I like working with you. Do you like working with me?
Yeah, you're funny. I like it.
Good. Just had to make that clear.
You know, we get along real well. I mean, and Marcus and I are very similar in some ways and very different in many ways too. And but you know, anytime you can have good trust, good rapport, you know how your strengths complement one another. You know, those are the secrets of a good partnership in the writing world, in business, and anything. So we've had a really good time. But as Marcus said, you know, it would have to be a different topic. What that could be, I don't know. But in between then there's other projects too that we have to work around. So we shall see what happens.
and it's gonna have to be
tuned.
closer than 10 years. So but I'll come in my
10 years.
wheelchair to watch you guys. So.
Oh, the pressure.
We'll have to find out what Marcus has got hiding in his closet that he's been working on.
I never
7
even
years.
asked that question. I've never asked that. I mean, Who
What else do you
knows
have?
what else is lurking in that closet?
I'll never tell.
Oh, so, we
Be
got a
gold
little
mine in
bit, yeah,
there.
good. In writing this book, and even some of the other books you've done, how does your faith affect what you include and not include, or even write about?
Mhm.
I think there's a difference probably between Christian fiction and Christians who write fiction. And I see this as a book as the latter. I mean,
Okay.
it's we write from that worldview where hopefully, yeah, we love Jesus, we're following Jesus, we want to be more like him, we want to communicate that ministry in any way that's possible. And yet this, I mean, yeah, this book has already received a bit of criticism for, well, it features drinking, it features cussing. Now, we don't actually say these, the cuss words in this book because we're published by Baker. But
There's a couple historical ones that we could not change that are in
yeah,
one.
yeah. What we're trying to do there is show genuine characters who are put in this situation. And our three characters are not necessarily Christians, nor do they all become Christians in this book. We're not trying to preach a sermon. We're not trying to, we're not trying to give 3 points in a poem to wrap things up. But we do write with this Christian worldview, and that is everybody in the world, no matter who you are, you've got to answer the world's big questions. Where do we come from? Why are we here? Where do we go when we die? I mean, everybody's got to answer those questions. And so when you write with that faith-based worldview, you're going to have your characters wrestle with those questions and hopefully come to some good conclusions in the end.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of I think every good novel is a novel where the main character, at least, if not more characters, other characters are questioning their identity and who they are. So who they think they are at the beginning of the book turns out to be different than who they truly are at the end of the book. And as an author, for me, it's always important to tell an inspirational story where you leave feeling like you took something away that inspires you. I've read stories before where, the ending is tragic or it's really bleak and does that happen in real life? Yes. And yes, there are bleak things, but I don't want readers going away feeling bleak. I want them to feel like this was an adventure well worth taking for the inspiration and the development and of the characters and the questions that it raises in the reader's own minds about what would I do in this situation? What do I believe? How would this impact me? Am I like this character or this character?
I think our book as well could be used as a great discussion starter, either between you and a friend who both read the book or a book club. And again, watch for that symbolism. Now that I've said that word and just laid it on the table, let me point out a few things just to watch for. I mean, we have a character who is washed clean in one very important scene in the book. We have another character who is called the Great Physician. Why? We have another character. I'm going to stop there, but that's the kind of thing.
Stop there, Marcus. Stop.
Watch for these things. They're in there.
We're both speakers. Marcus and I are both speakers, and we both are teachers. And but this is one instance where we don't want to speak. We only want to show. Yeah,
and that's what you want to do in a good fiction book. And if you do the sermon that doesn't belong in the story, everything falls apart. We've all read books like that, whether it's a sermon or somebody speaking about something.
And that's not my style. I mean, readers of my books know that's definitely not my style, and I don't believe it's Marcus's style either.
I write mostly for a secular crowd, and sort of always have. Just the subject matter and the people that I've profiled. And so there's great sensitivity. If you have no faith persuasion, are you still welcome to read this book? Absolutely. We're not going to preach at you. Hopefully we'll help raise some questions in your life, but everybody is welcome to read this book.
Yeah. Yeah. And then that's one of the things I like about it is I could share it with somebody who's not a Christian and it doesn't smack them over the head, so to speak.
Absolutely.
And I love the idea of that one of you said, and I think it was you, Marcus, about, book clubs and having a discussion around it. I think that makes a better Christian book, whether fiction or nonfiction, is one I can talk to somebody about, as opposed to, well, once you read this, it's going to change your mind. No.
Yeah, there's probably a place. This is a good discussion to have. There's probably a place for overt Christian fiction. I mean, I have Facebook friends, and Tosca does as well, who write very pointed faith-based messages, I would say, and no disrespect to them either. There's probably a good place for them.
There's an audience for everybody.
Yeah, there's an audience for everybody. This book is not that.
Mhm.
No. Yeah, and there's going to be people that are going to, and you guys have both been writers for years, so I can say it is, there's going to be people that are going to tell you they hated it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, you got to be thick-skinned if you're an author. Let me clue you. That's one of the reasons I can't write a book.
Right, and for the audience who are wrestling with these bigger questions, what is fiction? What is Christian fiction even all about? This is a great discussion to have, and so it really kind of it hits those cylinders that we love to talk about. Jesus, when he's talking, how did he communicate most often? He talked in parables. He talked in stories, and his stories weren't always super clear. Now, they did have points, they did have reasons, they did have meanings, but Jesus often didn't explain himself. He just sort of put the story out there, and then he let that story take on a life of its own.
Mhm.
I think Jesus would have been a fantastic novelist.
I think so too.
He would have been, yeah.
Yeah. And I agree. And because I love books like this, and like you're talking about, where you get to wrestle with it.
Yeah.
Even with a good ending, whether it's the, bow ending or if it's got leftover threads, I get to decide how it ends then. And, we all get to decide that a little bit. So, I think we could go on for hours with this, Marcus, because that is something I have wrestled with here in the bookstore, is what makes, Christian fiction. I have people complaining when a book says even like golly gee, and then others who want books like The Long March Home, where it's like hard hitting. You included, that classic, I shouldn't say classic, but time sensitive or time framed language. This is what it was,
You're talking about the song. There's a song that they used to sing, these soldiers, and it has a couple words in it, and we could not change it because it is historical.
Yep.
So anything we had control over, we took out as far as cursing or anything like that. But there is one particular thing we could not take out, and it wasn't up to us. It's, it's historical. So
Chris, you were telling us when we met in Grand Rapids, you were telling us about Laura's book, right? Unbroken.
Oh yeah.
And Laura and I are Facebook friends. We've corresponded a few times. To my knowledge, I'm not sure exactly where she stands. I don't think she's a Christian. I'm not positive about that. I want to put words around.
I think you're right.
But that her book Unbroken includes Louis Zamperini's testimony, how he met Christ at a Billy Graham crusade, and for that reason, you chose to include that book in the store, if I'm remembering that correctly. So here's a book it's not published by a Christian publisher, so to speak. I'm not positive it's written by a Christian, but it's got some Jesus stuff in it. It's featured in a bookstore, in a Christian bookstore. So these are great conversations that I think anybody who loves books and anybody who's got a faith persuasion is wrestling with today.
Yep.
Well, it's a very hard category too, because it's a whole spectrum, really. I mean, there are Christians who write stories, and I know many of them who, and a lot of those are in the mainstream market. And then there are Christians who write very Christian fiction. But I think that's a very broad spectrum, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and it comes down to what makes something quote unquote Christian. I mean, because I own a car, does that make it a Christian car? Because I'm a Christian and I own it?
Depends on what's in your bumper sticker.
I don't have bumper stickers. I think they're ridiculous. I'm sorry. Did I say that out loud? I don't have the little fish on my back, so you're gonna have to guess.
I think, but I think it's also, I think there's spectrums like that in every genre, though, every genre. Romance has a broad spectrum of what readers do like or don't like.
Yep.
Thrillers, women's fiction. There's a broad spectrum of what is considered acceptable to some readers and what is considered not acceptable to readers, and that's just in the mainstream market even. So, and I think that's okay.
Yeah, C.S. Lewis wrote from a faith-based perspective. Are his books Christian? Some of them very overtly mere Christianity. Some of them Chronicles of Narnia. Everybody reads those.
It has a witch in it.
Shades of Aslan. The line is Aslan Jesus? C.S. Lewis would say, well, I wrote the story. J.R.R. Tolkien, another one, wrote from that Christian worldview. Are his books Christian?
They are, but he took his Christianity and hid it more. And there's that famous argument that Tolkien and Lewis have. And that's why we have Narnia and the Lord of the Rings, because they said, this is how you write a Christian fantasy. And they're night and day different. And yet they're both considered classic Christian fiction.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. See, we'll never answer this question. We could talk for hours. So,
I don't think it needs to be answered, though. I think it's better left unanswered, honestly. I think
so. And I think it's
left
something you need to, and you need to decide on your own. I can't force it on you.
Right.
My job is to make sure that I let people know that there's good books out there. And I carry, and you guys both know by when you were here, we carry a lot of things that wouldn't be considered a Christian book.
I think that's okay. I mean, there's a lot of redemptive, beautiful themes in a lot of literature.
Yeah.
That speak very loudly, actually.
I agree. Yeah. There's a couple of books, and I know we talked about it, is that they're completely secular books, and I carry them here because of the strong message in them.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Well, here we are. Now we've really ran our time up, which is also good.
Now we've done it.
Now we've done it. So I'm going to ask you both. I always like to make sure we advertise you good and proper. So where can the readers find more about each of you? Your website?
I'm everywhere on social media. You can find me and my giant German Shepherd Timber, who's more popular than me, on all of the places. And my website is toscalee.com.
Perfect.
Yeah, I'm 2 steps behind Tosca with social media, but on Facebook, a couple different places, Instagram. I got off Twitter because it was just sort of the voice of rage and lament in our world. And there is a case to be made for rage and lament in the world, but I had had enough. I just got on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is my new go-to social media site. It's fun. Everyone's talking about business, and it's very positive. And then I've got my website, marcusbrotherton.com.
Awesome.
Yeah,
good.
There.
Do either one of you or both of you do newsletters? I know they always
yes, we both do. Please subscribe to our newsletters. Yes.
It's on our websites. Yeah.
Definitely. Good. That's one question I always get later. Is, do they, and I'm like, I got to start asking that question.
Yeah, so, no, we both do. And
awesome.
Good. Full of good stuff. So
well, the nice thing was I know I have to check. I thought I signed up for Marcus's. I'm going to double check that, but I know I get Tosca's. But yeah, they're always a lot of fun, interesting. So thank you both so much for coming tonight. This was a lot of fun and very, very interesting, even though we walked off on the fiction market questions instead of the book questions, so people have to forgive us, but fascinating. I like that. I like perspective on it. So
yeah,
thank
we're
you
always
both.
up for a discussion. So thank you for having us. And
thank you.
And you know what, Chris, I need to say thank you for the way that you always support authors. You support authors. You support books. You review books. You've reviewed my books since my very first novel, Demon and Memoir, a million years ago. And you've always been such a book champion and such an author champion. And we need about 1 million more of you in the world, and then the world will be a better place. So thank you for the work that you do to champion authors like us.
That is very
Yes.
kind. So
It's very
appreciate
true.
that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. I'm going to go and blush for a little while, so but that's okay. I'll get over it. When I was a kid, if I blushed, I hated it. Now it's like,
Oh, sorry. But it needs to be said, and people need to hear that, and they need to know the champions of the book world. And you are
thank you.
you are among the echelon of champions. So yeah.
Well, thank you very much for saying that. I really appreciate it. But yeah, you guys did me the big favor of coming in, though. This was fascinating, and you guys taught me things about, and I don't do it very often, but this is after hearing some of this, it's like, oh, I should probably reread that. So I'll have to look for the symbolism now. So that'll be more fun. So thank you, everybody, for joining us online tonight. And if you need to pick up a copy of their book, just go to bakerbookhouse.com and find a copy there. And I
Buy
think it's
2
still
copies.
2 copies, maybe 3, because I think they're 30% off yet. So,
They are.
and if you really feel adventuresome, buy a case. So, but thank you both again, and you guys have a good night.
Great. Thanks,
Thank
Chris.
you so
Thanks, everybody.
much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.